All right, everybody. Welcome back to our presentation, applying the 7 steps of data analysis to produce a quantitative research study. William Bannon of StatsWhisperer here again. Okay, in this presentation, we are going to review drafting a proposal for conducting your own research study. We're going to look at how to build evidence regarding why the topic you want to study should be studied. We're also going to show how to structure a methods section illustrating how the study will be conducted. And of course, with our focus on data analysis, we're going to talk about drafting a data analysis plan. Now, there are many reasons to write a research proposal, right? You may want to learn to design a comprehensive research study in a stepwise fashion, right? So you learn the anatomy of a research study by drafting that proposal, right? You may be looking for funding from an agency, right? So you write the proposal and you propose to do a study if it's funded and they give you the money to do it. Or it might be a requirement of your academic program, right? So if you have an academic program and you need to do a quantitative research study for, say, a dissertation or a capstone or a thesis study, right, you would need to write a research proposal before the study is approved and can be conducted. Also, you may want to learn how to conduct a comprehensive literature review, right? So you'll see this is actually part of step 7, the write-up and report. So we're getting started on step 7 here. Right? So this can actually, the materials we draft here can actually be presented in the write-up and report. Also, you may want to learn how to write a research proposal, right? To immerse yourself, right, in producing original scholarly work, right? So you see yourself as an active researcher producing original scholarly work. Now, across all research proposals, there are these 3 questions, right? So research proposal goals are to answer these 3 questions. First is what? What is the research problem you are addressing, right? And when we answer that, of course, we want to be very concise, right? We want to say exactly what the variables are and what the relationship between the variables is, right? Next is why. Why do you want to examine this research problem, right? This addresses what they call the so what question, right? So you do a study and the results turn out to be, X, Y, Z, then so what? What good are the study results? What are the consequences? What effect do they have? So what? Right? That's the why. And then lastly, we want to describe our how, right? How are we going to implement this study, right? We have to show that it's doable, and not only that it's doable, but we're doing it in the best way that we can. So if we look at the body of the research proposal, we could break it down into 7 sections. First, the abstract. Next, 2, the introduction. 3, the literature review. 4, the methods. 5, the implications. 6, the conclusion and the Gantt timeline. And then our citations, number 7. So let's go through each of those. So the title, right? So the title is kind of part of the abstract. So just we're fitting it in there. You'll see that the title is actually significant because you're going to need to add a title to your proposal. And when you sit down to do it, it's a bit of a task because you need to make the entire study concise and reflected, right, in 14 words. So the title should concisely indicate the independent and dependent variable relationship. It should pique the reader's interest and predispose him or her favorably toward the proposal. Right? So we want the reader, right, to read our title and say, oh, that's interesting. That's actually something I could promote. For example, we could call our proposal for sample study 1, promoting levels of happiness through considering if one lives with a dog or a cat. So favorable, right? So promoting levels of happiness. Most people would be in favor of that. And then through considering if one lives with a dog or a cat, it may pique the reader's interest, right? There was research a while ago saying there were psychological benefits for people that hugged a pet every day, right? So the reader might say, oh, I remember that, but no one's ever looked at what kind of pet. It's kind of interesting, right? So favorable and piquing the reader's interest, right? And it could be informative and catchy if you want to go that way. Just when you say catchy, it's catchy in the conservative sense. Now the abstract is between 150 and 250 words typically, right? So it's a summary of the proposed work. Now in that short little span of 150 to 250 words, we have to describe the research question, perhaps the theoretical framework if there is some, the research design, the sampling method, and the proposed data analysis. So we really need to hone down the entire study into 150 to 250 words. Now, some people suggest to write the abstract last because that's when the whole study has been written out. I would suggest to write the abstract first because to write out that abstract, you really have to hone down and know what your study is about, right? Because it's easy to hide lack of knowledge in 4 pages, but it's not easy to hide lack of knowledge in 250 words, right? So when you write out the abstract, it'll show that you really have a handle on this study. So I would say write the abstract first, and you can even flesh out the rest of the proposal from the abstract, because each sentence says a great deal. For example, if we look at sample study 1, we could say the proposed study employs, right, a cross-sectional, just the study design, a cross-sectional design, and involves a convenient sample, right, so that's the sampling method, of residents in an apartment complex in a major northeastern city. And there's the context, right? It's an apartment complex in a major northeastern city. So you're talking about pet ownership. How is pet ownership different in the context of an apartment complex in a city relative to, a house in the suburbs or a rural area, right? So it's important to know the context. Then we say a multivariate linear regression model will be used to indicate if happiness scores are significantly associated with happiness beyond the study covariate variables. Right? So you'll notice that our hypothesis testing is going to be done in step 6, the multivariate analysis, and that's the statistical analysis mentioned in the abstract. So there are many, many tests, right, and many details, but the statistical analysis we mentioned is the one used for the research question / hypothesis testing, which is the multivariate linear regression. Now, the entire research proposal is a pitch, right? Like sales, you're pitching, I have this great idea for this great proposal, right? And you should approve it. You should be excited about it, right? It's a pitch, right? So the introduction is the initial pitch, right? So don't forget, people generally remember the first thing and the last thing read. So they're going to remember the introduction is initial pitch, and the conclusion, which is almost a reiteration of the introduction. So we're really trying to drive home, the value of this study. So after the introduction, right, the reader should understand the study goal, what we're examining and why, but also recognize your passion for the topic, right? If you're going to do great work, you have to be passionate about it, right? So that should be evident in the introduction. And the reader should also, right, the enthusiasm is contagious, right? They should be excited about the study too after reading the introduction. So if we were to put this in the context of sample study 1, we might say, the study of happiness is a well-researched area, right, that has been related to several outcomes, including educational level, income level, several other factors, all with citations supporting those statements, right? So whenever we make a statement, we need a citation that supports that statement, right? So we're saying we're examining happiness, which has far-reaching effects into almost every part of your life, right? So we're saying why it's important. Then we say, however, right? So that's reasoning. That's our connecting statement. However, level of happiness has not been examined regarding type of pet ownership, right? So we have a little contrast there where happiness is important, but nobody's examined it in this context, right? So there's a need. Therefore, right? So there's a need, and we're going to do something about it. Therefore, the proposed study will examine if happiness differs at a significant level among study participants that live with a dog or a cat. Right? Compelling to some. Okay. So the literature review. Okay, so the purpose of the literature review is to review and synthesize, meaning put it all together into a cohesive whole, the prior studies that relate to the research problem under investigation. So we're putting the study in the larger whole of what has been and what is currently being explored, right? So essentially, we're going to present the questions other researchers have asked, the methods they have used, and their findings. And so you can imagine for happiness, there's probably a great deal of research. So the first thing we want to do is find that there are really big landmark studies that have examined happiness and try to find the most recent also, because those will usually have the other major citations, right, for the study topic you're examining. And so we want to know how happiness has been defined, what methods were used, and what was found, right? Many times there's conflicting findings, and that's okay to report. Say certain authors found this, and the other authors found conflicting findings, right? We want to report it all, right? And then we want to illustrate how the previous research hasn't examined the issue we're proposing, right? So we want to show that we've looked at all the literature, and if it was out there, we would have found it. But we looked at all the literature, and within that literature, what we're proposing to examine has not been looked at. So now keep in mind, a literature review has very dense information, right? There's a great, like I said, you'll find conflicting findings, that you'll find, concurrent findings, you'll find many things. So you need to have it all very organized. So intelligently structure the sections to assist the reader to grasp key arguments. Right? So you don't want to be all over the place. Right? So you want to have concise points and really summarize what's said. Right? Break up the literature review into conceptual categories and themes. So have headings and subheadings. Consider this 4-point plan, right? And this is part of the presentation for step 7, write up and review, the 4-point plan for drafting a literature review, right? So first, discuss the dependent variable, links to the covariate variables, right? So we go on PubMed or PsycInfo or some search engine. We find everything there is about happiness, and we summarize it, right? and we discussed the other important variables that is impacted by happiness. Right. Then second, the next section or paragraph, we discussed the independent variable. Right? Third, we discussed the dependent variable-independent variable link. And then fourth, this is the last paragraph before the methods section. It has a very specific purpose, right? This is where we present the study map information in a paragraph form for the reader. So for example, first we discuss the dependent variable, what it is, how it's measured, and so on. So we might say, happiness is often measured as reports of a specific emotion, right? And so on. We put our citations. Next, outcomes linked to the dependent variable, but not the independent variable yet. So one of the most consistent predictors of happiness is income level in our citation. And then it goes on from there. Second, we want to discuss the independent variable, what it is, how it's measured, right? So pet ownership is defined as, then we have our citation, how have other researchers looked at pet ownership and defined it, right? Outcomes linked to pet ownership, but not the dependent variable yet. So pet ownership has been linked to several outcomes, right? Such as beneficial, psychological, effects, and then a citation, right? And so on. Now, third, the next section, we want to marry the two. So we want to discuss the link between the dependent and independent variables, right? So we're establishing a need for our study. So we just had 2 paragraphs on each on how the independent and dependent variables are important, and now we're saying, but they haven't been compared, right? So research has not been conducted regarding if happiness occurs on a more or less frequent basis relative to pet type, right? Then we discuss our link. Evidence suggests pet owners with pets that demanded more care, such as cat, evidenced higher stress levels relative to those who own more independent animals, such as dogs. Now that might not be true, but that's an example strictly for the purpose of the literature review. Okay, so fourth, this is the last paragraph in the literature review right before the methods. And this is what it's for, right? To present our study map. So we present the independent-dependent variable relationship. So we say, the current study will examine if people who live with dogs have a significantly higher level of happiness relative to people who live with cats. We also mention our covariate variables. Also included are the covariate variables that have been shown to impact happiness, such as education and income. And then we have the last statement of significance, the last sentence within the literature review, right? This analysis represents the first study examining an analysis of happiness by pet type. Now you'll see in the book, the textbook, right? We have a discussion of the methods and also examples of presenting the methods, right? And it's a great deal, right? So we won't present it all on the slides. So we'll present what they are and then focus on a couple of particularly important ones. So the methods often includes a lot, right? So we discuss how we're going to recruit the study participants, right? Where are we going to find them? We're going to hand out flyers. How are we going to do it? Right? How are we going to garner informed consent and IRB approval for the proposed study? Right? Data collection. Who's going to collect the data and how? Right? A description of the sample. Right? So we describe who we'll be collecting from. Right? The measurement instruments. So we're going to consider that, how we describe that here. And we want to mention research design and our data analysis plan, which we'll also discuss here in this presentation. So, point regarding our measurement instruments. To understand statistical analysis, you must understand how each variable is measured in detail. Right? If you don't know how it's measured, you don't know if it's valid, if it's really measuring the construct you think it is, and you don't know what higher and lower scores indicate if it is measuring that construct. So we want to make that very clear. So when we talk about measurement instruments, we want to include a description of the instrument as well as references from prior studies regarding the reliability and validity of that instrument, if available. Right? Is it a widely used instrument? Is it just created for this study? We need to express that. Okay, so the number of items on the scale, right? Is that 5 items? Does it have 50 items? Right? How each item is scored? Is it a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10? Right? Or, doesn't have to be those two, but what it is, you need to say. The method used to compute the scale, such as taking the mean score of the valid items, the potential range of scores, so it's the highest and lowest score a study participant can get, and what the higher and lower scores indicate. Right? So we want to mention all that specifically and up front. So, for example, if we look at our happiness scale, we could say happiness is measured using a 5-item scale created for this study. Okay? The items are measured along a Likert type scale of 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree, right? And it's computed, scored, right, by taking the mean score of the valid responses, resulting in a potential range of scores of 1 to 5, with higher scores indicating greater happiness. So you see, in just a few sentences, we describe the essentials of the scale. So even if you have a longer description, even if it's a page or two about an instrument, to put these essentials right up front is very beneficial, because then the reader gets the crux of the scale right away. All right, now, the data analysis plan, right? So, the data analysis plan helps you put and follow and interpret the results, right? So it's very important, right? So we're going to have it in detail here. So data analysis is a process, right? So what we want to present is a description of each phase of the quantitative analysis process, right? And right, we want to make sure we mention those checks of data integrity, because that's the hallmark of a comprehensive study. So if we were to take sample study 1, we might say data analysis will be conducted in 3 phases, right? Understandable, right? And this is in the 7 steps of data analysis. This is steps 4, 5, and 6. And so first, all data will be analyzed descriptively. So that's step 4, the univariate analysis. Second, the relationship between the dependent variable and predictors, the independent and covariate variables, will be examined using bivariate analysis. So that's step 5. And then step 6 is here. Third, predictor variables associated with the dependent variable at a statistically significant level will be entered in the multiple linear regression model, right? Then we also want to mention our checks of data integrity. So all test assumptions related to parametric testing, if you recall, right? Homoscedasticity, linearity, normality, multicollinearity, checks of outliers, and so on, will be assessed prior to quantitative analysis. Now, sometimes the power analysis gets its own paragraph, but we could also include it here in the methods. So a power analysis indicated 85 study participants provided sufficient power to detect a medium-size effect in an MLR using 4 predictors, and so on. Right now, addressing missing data. Now, we don't know how much missing data there might be. There might be a little, there might be a lot. It may present a great problem or or no problem at all if there are no missing data, right? So we say missing data will be treated as needed according to the amount and pattern of the missing data values. So we don't know what it is, right? So we could mention, that we will consider MI, the multiple imputation we mentioned. We could mention that we'll consider, imputing the valid items, the mean of the valid items, right? Or we could just make that statement. Lastly, right, where appropriate, psychometric properties of the measurement instruments will be assessed, including internal consistency, right, the Cronbach's alpha, on the happiness scale for the current sample, right? And there we go. Now, lastly, the implication. So this is more of that so what sort of question, right? So we want to say after we do this research, we get our findings, so what? What are the implications? What's the value? So we can ask these questions of ourselves. How will your research refine, revise, or extend the existing knowledge of the study topic? Right? What difference does it make? How will the study impact future research? Right? So how can somebody take your research findings and run with that and advance it and develop it? Right? In theory and practice and interventions and policy. And lastly, to stimulate your mind to think about this, look at the implications section of other papers, reports, and proposals, right? What implications did they anticipate or report? And if you need to generate ideas, use some more probing questions, right? Will the results influence programs? Which programs? Methods, the way things are examined, right? Interventions, and and will the results influence policy decisions, right? And lastly, what will be improved or changed as a result of the proposed research? So it's better to write these all down, freehand writing, to generate your ideas. Now, as we said, the conclusion, remember we said the introduction and conclusion are both compelling statements regarding what we're looking at, right? Because the reader is going to remember the first and last things most. So the conclusion is a compelling reiteration, 1 to 2 paragraphs, of why the research problem is worth investigating, why your research is unique, right? And how your research study advances knowledge. Right, so that's a good note to end on. Now, also, we mentioned the Gantt chart timeline. Now, if you look under our newsletters, the archived newsletters, we have one titled Gantt Live With It, Gantt Live Without It, right? Because the Gantt chart, you can't live without it because it's a great tool to structure your study. But you can't live with it because it really causes you to focus on what your tasks are. You have to make a big, long list of your tasks. Then you have to consider how much time you have to do them and fit it all in together. So it's useful, but it's demanding. Okay, so you see on the left-hand side, we have the activities listed, such as data collection, data analysis, data publication, the activities for almost any study. Then on the upper row, we have the dates that the study will be active. And it's 1/2016, 2/2016, and 3/2016. Then in the intersecting boxes, right, where the activity occurs in the appropriate time period, we put an X. So data collection occurs with the X under 1/2016. Data analysis occurs with the X intersecting with 2/2016, and lastly, data publication with 3/2016. So this is a useful tool right after the conclusions. The reader can see all the activities associated with the study and when they're going to be implemented. And of course, you need your citations, which includes your references, the list of literature that you've used to cite studies in your proposal, and the bibliography. The additional citations and key sources relevant to understanding the research problem. And remember, professional style formatted in APA or AMA. Okay, important points, right? So now we're leaving off with something important to remember. So make sure you cite the landmark works in the literature review, right? So you want those major things cited because that will be a big gaping hole, right? If there's major works and you haven't read them, that's not a comprehensive literature review, right? So then consider the study context, the time, place, and people, right? So I think the study that found beneficial psychological effects for hugging a pet every day was among elderly study participants, right? So we want to report that context. So if we're examining it among a population with varying ages, we want to report is the context of varying ages, right? So we, of course, it's a proposal, so we want to develop a coherent and persuasive argument, right? Don't go off on unrelated tangents, right? So you'll see every paper you read has a different stint. So you don't want to let it drag you off into its own stint. You want to keep in mind what you're examining. And lastly, be concise and pay attention to the major issues. So if we're talking about pet ownership, we don't want to get dragged into discussing, flea powder and collars, right? We're going to talk about pets and happiness. And it's a phenomenon how quickly that can happen in a literature review. So next class, we're going to talk about step 4 and step 5, univariate and bivariate analysis in the context of a quantitative study with a continuous dependent variable. Okay, thank you for watching, and I will see you at that class.